If it is the case that we're not who we think we are, and it is the case that it's not the way we think it is, then it would be in our best interest to wake up and start to see things as they really are and start to discover our true nature. And that's what meditation makes available. And the condition that human beings are in is they think that the way it is that we're at the effect of life. The thinking activity has it figured out that the reason you're not happy is because of your circumstances. Is that not the case? Isn't that the typical way that human beings think? Isn't that the typical way that human beings interact with life? That the reason I'm not happy is because of the circumstances. It's because I don't have enough money. It's because of the color of my skin. It's because the president's an asshole. It's because my children hate me. It's because my wife doesn't know how to behave. It's because my parents mistreated me as a child. On and on and on. That's an endless story. It's an endless story that people tell about their victimhood. Okay? But everybody shares this understanding that that's the truth, right? And if that's the truth, what's left? How do we deal with this? It seems like an overwhelming situation, doesn't it? Everything's against you. Life sucks and then you die. Everything's against you. This is the common understanding that human beings are living in. And if that's the case, what's left, right? Well, all you have to do is look and see how things go in that condition. What's left is addiction. What's left is avoiding suffering by being as comfortable as possible, taking prescription medication, getting a case of beer every week, watching enough sports, making sure you're distracted so you don't have to think about yourself and your life, right? And all the rest of it, Addictions, in the way that I define them, are not just drugs and alcohol and rock and roll. Addictions are anything that you do in a repeated way in order to avoid suffering and avoid pain and control yourself and control your life that has negative life consequences, which means addiction can be anything. You can be addicted to working out. You can be addicted to thinking, and you are addicted to thinking. Because thinking is something that you do repeatedly like a habit, and it has negative life consequences, doesn't it? Yeah, because all the things that you did that didn't work were things you thought to do that didn't work. And the thinking activity and the condition that we're in the thinking activity is that the source of suffering is the circumstances, the source of suffering is other people, the source of suffering is the world, and all of that. And of course, you can't control all of that. It's impossible to control all of that, right? So you do your best. You do your best to try and get some place to live, buy a gun to keep in the house so you can control the perimeter. Right? That's the way we live. Try and make as much money so you can be as much in control as possible, Try and control your body with enough medication to preserve it long enough to stay around, hoping that you'll someday be happy, right? All the rest of it. The truth, the capital T truth, is that that's a mistaken perception and it's a mistaken identity. You're not who you think you are, and it's not the way you think it is. That's why so much interest has been given to the capital T truth all the way back as far as recorded time. Because this truth is a truth that offers you freedom, it offers you the experience that's available for you as a human being in which you can be free, happy, satisfied, and at peace. It's available all the time. Hard to believe. It's unbelievable that what you've been seeking all your life is literally always available to you all the time. That's an unbelievable statement, and yet it's absolutely true. And the thing that allows the shift to occur in which you can start to experience the natural state and experience happiness, peace, and well-being is that you stop believing the mistaken idea that the source of suffering is circumstances. You stop believing that. That's what the voice in your head's been telling you all along. The problems that you're having are a function of circumstances. Change your circumstances. Get a new wife. Get a new car. Get a new house. Move to Europe. Get a nose job. Keep changing things, trying to control things. That's the way to get this thing to work, right? In reality, the truth of the matter is that it's not the circumstances that are causing human suffering. It's thinking of all things that's causing human suffering. The last place that people would look is thinking, because we consider thinking to be sacred, don't we? We teach our children to think, right? Thinking is considered a very important activity. right? If somebody gives you something to consider, they say, think about it, right? You get up in the morning, what's the first thing you do? You start thinking about the day or about yesterday and about tomorrow. Any situation you find yourself in, you're actively involved with the voice in your head thinking about it. It's giving you information, it's giving you feedback, it's telling you what to do, it's telling you what not to do. It's telling you who your enemies are, right? It's telling you what's right and wrong, right? It's a constant activity in your head, right? Doesn't allow you to get much sleep, right? Keeps you anxious, keeps some people depressed, right? Because some people get so hopeless about life, given the fact that they're following this voice in their head that keeps giving them negative information, that keeps them afraid, and makes them feel hopeless, like there's no use. There's no use. Given how screwed up the world is, there's no use, right? So I give up, I resign. Most human beings, by the time they're 50 years old, they resign. The truth of the matter is that thinking is the reason that people are suffering, because the thought process telling you circumstances are the source of your well-being or your suffering, when in fact, circumstances are neutral. Circumstances are neutral. One of my teachers said that it's not, that nothing that ever happens is ever the source of the suffering for human beings. Nothing that ever happens is the source of suffering for human beings. The source of suffering for human beings is not what's happening, it's what you think about what's happening. It's not what's happening, it's what you think about it, and it's how you feel about it that's causing the suffering. If you take any situation in your life that you think is terrible, any situation that you think is causing you suffering, and you just imagine what it would be like without the thoughts, and imagine what it would be like without the feelings, right? If you just do that thought experiment, imagine what it would be like without thinking, without the feelings. If you really do that experiment, what you'll end up seeing is that it's harmless. Life is neutral. Life is not terrible. Life is the way life is. The trees know that. The animals know that. It takes a human being to be crazy, right? Because we generate this alternative reality all the time. The mind, the voice in your head is generating an alternative reality all the time that doesn't fit the way things actually are. Therefore, you're in conflict with life. You're in conflict with other people. You're living the life of a victim. All you have to do is consider driving your car in traffic, and you see what I'm talking about, right? What's causing you to suffer when you drive your car in traffic? The other cars, right? The situation, right? What would your life be like if you were to wake up and realize that it's not the circumstances that are determining your experience? What would your life be like if you woke up and realized it's not the circumstances that determine your experience? It's the thought process about those circumstances that's generating emotions and reactions about those circumstances, and that's causing the suffering. This is why people who understand what meditation is are willing to go and live in a monastery and live separate from the rest of the world to develop this ability to pay attention and get free from the suffering, because they realize that that's the only way out. The only way out of this is in. The only way out of this is to realize that the situation you're in is being generated all the time by your conditioned mind. That's a prison. That's a prison because it's limited. Just consider this. When you are born and you begin to take in information as a baby, and you begin to think, and you begin to take in data, you begin to take in information about life, right, into your mind. You're exposed to elementary education, a high school education, sometimes a college education, sometimes a graduate school education, right? And all that information that you've taken in from your society, from the teachers you've been exposed to, from the interpretations you made of your experience, all that information that you take in that's called your conditioning, right? That's the database you're using to understand reality all the time, right? That database, compared to what there is to know, wouldn't even show up. Tell me and if that's not a prison, I don't know what a prison is, right? If that's not a prison, I don't know what a prison is, because that's super limited. It's super limited, right? And you're living inside that super limited reality all the time, trying to experience freedom, and that's never going to happen until you realize you're in prison and you start to do what it takes to get free. And meditation is a practice that will allow you to gradually go sane. It will allow you to gradually come out of the fog. It will allow you to gradually start to experience what's always available to all of us, which is this experience of well-being, this experience of peace of mind, this experience of satisfaction and happiness. Where is that available? If you practice meditation consistently and you get used to what it's like to be the awareness of what's happening instead of the thinking activity, you will discover that this awareness is happy. Its natural state is happy. Why? Because it's not thinking about anything, it's just being. When you think about things, the voice in your head turns what's happening into shit. When you think about things, the voice in your head interprets what's happening based on your conditioning, and it's a fear-based operation, and it's got an inclination to see everything in a negative light. And that produces what you consider to be reality. Of course, you're living in hell now. Right? So meditation is a way out of that. A meditation is not a religion. It's not even a spiritual situation. It's scientifically based. It will change your brain, right? So that somebody who's been meditating for several decades, they literally have a different brain than most human beings have. And their brain works differently than most human beings' brains. And if you interact with this person is peaceful. This person is naturally happy. There are examples of this walking around on the planet, right? They're called living masters. They're called enlightened human beings. But the thing about it is that the reality is that this is not a special state. They're not in a special state. They're in an ordinary state. They're in a state that is a natural, ordinary state that's available to any human being because we all share the same identity as awareness itself. Therefore, you and the Dalai Lama are literally exactly the same. You and Jesus Christ are literally exactly the same. You and the Buddha are literally exactly the same. That's why the Buddha said that everybody has Buddha nature. That's why Jesus Christ said everybody has Christ nature, right? Why would these people go out and teach to ordinary human beings? Why would these people go out and teach to other human beings if they didn't know that what they had was available to everybody? Why would they teach it? So it is available to everybody. It's available to you and I, but it's not going to happen by itself. You've got to establish a practice of learning to stay out of your head. You've got to start to establish a practice where you understand you can use thinking, right? This is the thing that causes confusion. Because if I say to you, you're not the voice in your head, right? You might say to me, well, I can make the voice do what I want. I can use thinking. I can make thinking think what I want it to think. And you can, can't you? There are things that you think about, when you're doing your work, when you're doing practical activities, you can cause thoughts. If I ask you to imagine the numeral 10 right now, you can produce that in your mind visually, right? But the truth be told, if you really started to pay attention and realize that kind of thinking using the working mind happens a relatively small percentage of the time. The rest of it, you're in what the brain scientists call the default state. The default state is when you're not actively, intentionally using thinking, but the thinking continues anyway. And in that default state, right, the condition that you're in the voice in your head, right, is producing all the judgments and evaluations, producing all the conflict, telling you that things should be different than they are, right? Telling you that you know what's true, you know what's right, right? That's called ignorance. It's called ignorance. And when I say ignorant, I don't mean it in a detrimental way. Stupidity is a detrimental statement. Ignorance just means you're ignoring the truth, that's all. You're just ignoring reality. So when you learn to meditate, you're learning to pay attention to what? To what's really happening instead of what you think about it. And if you learn to do that, you'll begin to discover that what you think about it is off the mark a lot of the time. The word sin, the root of the word sin is to miss the mark. The word sin actually comes from archery. It means to miss the mark, right? It got turned into a moral reality in a lot of religious teachings, right? That you need to be punished because you're a sinner, because you didn't get it right. That's crazy. That's craziness, right? The reality is, if you missed the mark, you just had a mistake. You just made a mistake. A mistake, right? It's like you took a photograph and it wasn't the right photograph. It's a mistake. That doesn't make you a bad person. That doesn't mean you should be punished, right? It just means that you mistook things for something that they're not. And you mistook who you are for something that it's not. And you mistook life for something that it's not. So through practicing meditation and starting to study the teachings about the truth, right, you can gradually start to wake up. You can start to see things as they really are. You can start to experience a state of well-being, which is happiness, satisfaction, and peace of mind. It's available all the time. Right? But the first thing you have to do is be able to establish a meditation practice and to understand what you're doing when you're meditating and to keep doing it consistently because you understand what's at stake. And literally what's at stake in regard to what's available through meditation, literally what's at stake is whether or not you're going to be happy, satisfied, and peaceful before your body dies. That's what's at stake. And I mentioned to you earlier that, this is something that I can say till I'm blue in the face, right? But whether or not you hear, that saying that it was in the Bible, let those have ears hear, right? Whether you hear it or not will depend on whether or not you can get at least free enough momentarily from the prison of your personality to hear the message. One of the teachers that I follow says this is you're being served a spiritual subpoena. Right? You're being delivered an invitation to freedom. You're being given the opportunity to wake up. Whether or not you hear that message, whether or not you act on that message, depends on how deep in the shit you are in your personality. Some people hear this message and they get pissed off because they think I'm a cult. They think this must be a cult. Well, if you're in the cult that is the biggest cult on earth, you will see the truth as a cult, right? Because the biggest cult on earth has all the agreement, doesn't it? All the human beings that are living on the planet think they already know who they are and they already know what reality is. In spite of the fact that the evidence says that can't be true because look at the mess they're making, Look at the news. If people knew the truth and they knew who they were and they knew how things really worked, why would they create war? Why would they create hatred? Why would there be so much conflict? Why would we be looking for new ways to discriminate against each other? Find new ways to make people different from one another so that people could climb on top of each other to get to the top of the heap. That's insanity. It's insanity. So this is about going sane. And it takes a commitment, it takes a willingness to practice, it takes a willingness to be guided in that practice so you don't go off the rails and get lost again. And it takes an absolute commitment over time because the single thing that will determine the outcome in this process, if you begin the process at all, the single thing that will determine the outcome of this process is whether or not you persist, whether or not you're able to persist. Because if you start to establish a meditation practice, you will be challenged. You'll be challenged because the voice in your mind that you thought was you, once you start to wake up and realize it's not you, it'll try and regain its control. Right? It'll try and regain its control. It'll tell you, oh, don't meditate, you're tired. Or you don't have to meditate, that's a bunch of bullshit. Don't listen to that guy. Yeah. Or don't meditate, you're too busy. Or the best one yet, don't meditate, you're too upset. Meditation is supposed to cure you of the source of your suffering, but don't meditate because you're suffering too much. You can't meditate, you're too busy suffering. So human beings are preoccupied with the drama of life. They're preoccupied with their version of reality, right? And they're going to keep operating that way until their body drops dead. They're going to keep trying to control everything, trying to avoid, the discomfort by using sex, drugs, rock and roll, any form of distraction available. The question you have to ask yourself is, are you going to be part of the herd? What if the truth is the whole herd is flying to hell? Are you going to fly to hell? If the herd is going off a cliff, are you going to go off the cliff with the herd? Because if you look at humanity as a whole, that's literally what the evidence says, that humanity as a whole is going off a cliff, right? There are a lot of scientists around now that scientifically predict that the end of humanity is in our future, in the near future. The end of humanity is in the near future. And most of us are in as much denial about that as we are about our own death. Right? But the evidence is pretty strong that indicates that that's probably true. We're killing the earth. We're killing the earth, right? We're driving ourselves crazy. We're stressing ourselves out. We're killing our bodies. Psychologically, our lives aren't that much worth living anyway, right? That's what was it, Plato or Socrates said, an unexamined life is not worth living. So maybe it's time to examine your life and ask yourself the right questions, like, do I know really who I am? Do I really know what life is? If I did know who I am and I did know what life is really all about, then how come it's not working? Isn't that a reasonable question? Isn't that a reasonable question? It's not only a reasonable question, but it's a good question to ask because there's an answer. There's an answer, and the answer is wake up. The answer is slow down, relax your nervous system, calm your mind, train yourself to pay attention, and you might see what you're looking at instead of just thinking about it. So the talks are, the purpose of the talks are to motivate you to practice meditation, to get you to understand this is not just a hobby, this is not just stress reduction, this is about waking up and discovering the possibility of having your life be worth living, of enjoying yourself.